We have one singular focus, and that's ensuring that, meaningful privacy continues to exist even in the digital realm. So, of course, the norm for human communications for hundreds of thousands of years has been privacy, right? You didn't have a handful of corporations and governments, having access to everything you say and where you were located when you said it and your social graph at that moment, like the, kind of the absurd dossiers that are now available to, these powerful entities. And our belief is that, we should still have meaningful communications privacy because a world without it is an extraordinarily dismal prospect. So, we navigate with that North Star in mind.
Hi, welcome to Innovative Minds. My pleasure to be here as your host. Just call me TaiwanPlus. This show is a forum for leaders in tech and politics to discuss how to solve today's problems with today's tools. Today, our special guest is Meredith Whittaker. Meredith is the president of Signal Foundation and the co-founder of the AI Now Institute. I'm also here with Audrey Tang, Taiwan's digital minister. Today, we will discuss the current state of the open source movement, upcoming advancements in AI regulation, and ways to envision a future where new technologies empower and protect users. Okay, so before we get started, I want to introduce our two guests today. Meredith is the president of Signal Foundation, a nonprofit organization that supports the development of privacy-focused communication tools. They primarily focus on the Signal messaging app. Meredith is also the co-founder of the AI Now Institute, an interdisciplinary research center that studies the societal impact of artificial intelligence. Hi Meredith, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Audrey Tang is Taiwan's digital minister. She became Taiwan's youngest minister without portfolio in 2016 when she headed the public digital innovation space. She has been a hacktivist for over 2 decades. She is also a promoter of open source innovation. Hi Audrey.
Hi, and Meredith, congrats on winning the EFF award.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor. On behalf of all Signal.
Mm-hmm.
To start, Meredith, could you give us a brief summary of your background and journey as president of Signal Foundation?
Absolutely. And since I've been in this industry for a long time, I'll be brief because it could go on forever once you reach my age. But I've been in tech for almost 20 years at this point, and I started right out of college at Google in 2006. So I started at a very, very different time in the tech landscape. At that point, Google was a smaller website than Yahoo as measured by monthly active visitors. There was no such thing as an iPhone. If you had a smartphone, it was a BlackBerry. And I had to print out paper directions to get to my first interview at Google. So just to set the scene, I effectively worked at Google during a time of extraordinary transformation and consolidation in the tech industry. And my career there spanned many different positions. I kind of grew as the company grew, and that was at a rapid pace. So I worked in open source. I was a co-founder of the Measurement Lab effort. Measurement Lab is an open source platform that collects open data about internet performance. So it helps set benchmarks around questions of neutrality and other questions around sort of low-level internet protocols. And I mentioned that because that was sort of the catalyst for my interest in AI. So I was running Measurement Lab, and then I, began hearing, in the early 2010s about AI or machine learning. And I was like, what is this? What are we doing? Why is this so trendy? And realized that a lot of what was happening was, taking data as a given and obscuring it with statistical techniques, which was concerning to me because I spent a lot of my time, obviously, as someone who was running a measurement platform, caring a lot about accurate data, caring a lot about accurate data construction methodologies, and caring a lot about making sure we could reliably say that data was an accurate proxy for reality. So that was sort of my path into kind of interest in AI, concern over AI. And of course, data is at the nexus of privacy concerns. So alongside of that, I was working on issues of privacy. I was very involved in the Signal community, or the community within which Signal was part, starting in the early 2010s. So that was really sort of, those are key benchmarks along my pathway. And, fast forward a number of years, I ran an institute at NYU. I was at the Federal Trade Commission. And then, a little over a year ago, it became increasingly clear to me, and I still believe this, that the best use of my time would be to commit myself to ensure that Signal grows and thrives, and that we not only maintain private, truly private digital communications, but we grow and ideally that becomes a ubiquitous form of digital communication. So that's what I'm doing now. That's what I'm thinking about, and it's great to be here.
Thank you, Meredith. I'm sure your rich background will make this conversation all the more valuable. Now to you, Audrey. What sparked your interest in contributing to the open source movement from a young age?
Yeah, I've been in the industry for 27 years now, since my first startup in 1996 using the Perl language. I was a high school dropout from junior high back then, and I was able to convince the head of my school to let me drop out because I showed her the Wide Web, in particular the Gutenberg project with the free access of the classic works and archive, ARXIV, which is, of course, open access of the cutting edge research. So she feels that I can still give myself an education even without actually going to school. And so since I did most of my education based on open access and open source and the commons, it's natural that I feel that I must give back. And earlier in those days, there's no open source. In 95, it's called a free software community. And we in the Perl community work closely with GNU, with Linux, with many Apache communities to ensure that what takes from the commons contributes back to the commons. So a lot of my early work was to ensure a infrastructure of trustworthy libraries published in software packages, digital signatures, quality assurance, and things like that, and all in a exercise of giving back, because that is literally my community.
Meredith, the Signal software is free and open source. Can you explain to our audience how the open source business model works and why it is important for you to be structured as a nonprofit?
Yeah. Well, in our case, I would say open source is part of how we realize our commitment to the people that rely on us. It's not actually a business model. Our business model is, we ask people for donations to keep Signal thriving because we refuse to monetize surveillance. And of course, that's the dominant business model in the tech industry. And that gets to why it's important that Signal is a nonprofit. Because, of course, if the dominant way of making money in your industry is monetizing surveillance, i.e. violating privacy, then if you are building a system that is solely focused on privacy, you will likely face some pressure to reduce that, erode that, or otherwise put profits and growth above that focus on privacy. So, in our case, particularly in this industry, being a nonprofit is, not only a tax status, it's actually a way of guarding against pressures from investors or our board or others that might, structurally want to put profits above our core mission, which is privacy.
Following up on that, the Signal protocol is an end-to-end encryption technology used for private communication. As we're aware, this particular feature is no longer uncommon, as it is now present in many messaging apps. In your view, what sets Signal apart from other messaging platforms in terms of its commitment to privacy and security?
Oh, well, I love this question. The Signal protocol was authored by Moxie Marlinspike and Trevor Perrin in 2013, and it was a historical event in the history of cryptography, because it effectively made end-to-end encryption on mobile messaging apps possible in a way that human beings could access and use casually, instead of it being a kind of requiring an ideological commitment that would impel you to figure out how to use PGP or other systems. So this was a real game changer. And in fact, one of the reasons that we see end-to-end encryption becoming more ubiquitous in other non-Signal messaging apps is because those apps are using the Signal protocol. So WhatsApp adopted the Signal protocol in 2015, recognizing that it had actually made, ensuring the privacy of message contents possible. Many others use and license the Signal protocol. So, I think that's pretty special. But I would say that, Signal actually goes beyond encrypting the contents of messages, what you're saying with the protocol. And that's one of the key differences between Signal and, say, WhatsApp and other messengers, is that not only do we use the Signal protocol to protect what you're saying, but we've developed novel cryptographic techniques on top of that that protects your metadata. So information about you, who you're talking to, and other extraordinarily revealing information. So we don't know your name, we don't know your profile photo, we don't know who's in a group that you're talking to, we don't have your contact list, and we don't know who's sending a message to whom. And we can look to quotes from James Clapper and others that are very clear that metadata will get you, I think he said, 80% of the information you need. So protecting that metadata, particularly in the age of powerful inferential AI systems, is really, really important. I would say it's essential to truly protecting privacy. So we do all of that, and we're open source. So you don't have to take our word for it. You can scrutinize our code. You can, find bugs if there are bugs. You can report them. So we benefit from that immune system as well.
I see. Being open source also allows you to benefit from user feedback to ensure the security of the protocol. Audrey, do you think we need to make changes to the open source business model to keep the best minds engaged in this collaborative effort?
Yeah, because I'm old enough, I guess, to remember open source before the term open source. The main idea back then was that it should serve as a kind of societal infrastructure. That is to say, the very basic underpinnings, for example, communication like Signal, or identity, or payment, or just emailing, right, each other, identifiers, and so on, should not be controlled by either a very big state or a very big company. The control should be decentralized but still interoperable. And that was the very basic ideas of the internet itself. And so I think that business model need to be rethought by thinking of software and open data, of course, as a civilizational infrastructure. And as of this year, we finally convinced the Taiwan cabinet that public code, that is to say open source that's used in the public service, qualifies as infrastructure. So the same kind of public investment that enabled the bridges and buildings and parks and campuses, the same idea should also be applied to maintain the underpinnings. Because if we do not do that and let the private sector do that, and they don't find a business model, then they will just do surveillance and sell that as their business model. So in a sense, the government's inability to step in and fund this is directly asking for those externality negative ones to be borne by our citizens. And so just like the government should invest in net zero research, in coaching the industries to reduce carbon emissions, so should we invest in privacy enhancing technologies and releasing them as public code so as to reduce the privacy pollutions in our information landscape. So this is what I think now as digital minister, of course, but also what I did believe in back in 1996.
Meredith, any comments about what Audrey just said?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see more public investment in shared infrastructure, shared digital infrastructure. One of the things that I think about, daily, and I'm very concerned about, is the infrastructural concentration in the hands of a few big tech companies, largely based in the US and China, and the fact that increasingly it is very difficult, in many cases impossible, to build software that is not in some way simply a dependency, or I would say it's almost impossible to build software that works, that it can be deployed, that is maintained, that isn't dependent on infrastructure, resources, tooling, et cetera, that is effectively either owned or controlled in some sense by those handful of corporations. So we have a tech ecosystem that is shaped by the profit motives and incentives of a few boards of directors, not by the social good.
Yes, and when we met, I think April this year, we briefly talked about that because Signal at the moment still runs on Amazon Web Service infrastructure. And so if the AWS for the moment does not have a full region in Taiwan, it means that Signal is very difficult to bring it to Taiwan without a lot of engineering around outposts or things like that. So in Taiwan, we have been investing quite a bit into translating a close sibling of Signal, that's Element Matrix, and hosting it ourselves and doing like emergency response drills and so on using decentralized Signal-like protocols and software suites. But just being able to present, and I did, to people in Amazon Taiwan and say, now we have a bet now, right? If you don't bring Signal or help bring Signal to Taiwan, we will have to use this, which is very similar. But if you do speed up your work, then Signal itself may be able actually to have this kind of local resilience if our subsea cables are cut. So I think both need to be developed. One is a good relationship with the public cloud providers, but also real alternatives, even if it's a little harder to maintain, but we still have to have a real alternative.
Yeah. And I think kind of digging into that, over the last 10 years, and Audrey, I know you saw this very closely, we've moved to a tech ecosystem where it was fairly common for a small or medium business, or even kind of a collective of developers to run their own servers and to host widely available digital content, even apps on servers that they ran, were in a warehouse somewhere that they had hardware operations maintaining those. That is now almost unheard of. We live in a digital ecosystem where just the norms of how our technology work are such that they implicitly require the type of massive global distribution that only a handful of companies have the server infrastructure to ensure. So in Signal's case, we actually as a nonprofit, we're looking at costs of hundreds of millions of dollars a year if we wanted to run our own infrastructure such that it could support particularly our calling, our voice calling and video calling services, which need to be always instantly available to people across regions. And the difference between if we were trying to do that on some local servers in the US, it means it would not work for anyone who wasn't sort of near those servers. And effectively, that means it wouldn't work for anyone because, not people need to call people, across the world. So it, the dependencies and the way this ecosystem has been continually shaped and reshaped to, effectively revolve around this increased concentration is something that we're very aware of as people who have to work with that ecosystem, whether we like it or not, every day. I should also mention that because Signal uses strong end-to-end encryption, while we do, host on Amazon and Google and other dominant cloud providers, they can't access any real information. It's just big encrypted blobs of data that no one, even Signal, can make sense of until it's decrypted by the sender and receiver. So that is not a compromise to privacy, but it is we go out of our way to make sure that we don't have to trust Amazon or anyone else on that.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, there has been an increased global focus on data privacy and protection in recent years. However, many laws and regulations have attempted to jeopardize the encryption integrity of an application like Signal in the name of online safety. How does the Signal Foundation navigate differing legal frameworks to ensure that users' privacy and freedom of expression rights are upheld?
We have one singular focus, and that's ensuring that, meaningful privacy continues to exist even in the digital realm. So, of course, the norm for human communications for hundreds of thousands of years has been privacy, right? You didn't have a handful of corporations and governments, having access to everything you say and where you were located when you said it and your social graph at that moment, like the, kind of the absurd dossiers that are now available to, these powerful entities. And our belief is that, we should still have meaningful communications privacy because a world without it is a extraordinarily dismal prospect. So, we navigate with that North Star in mind. And we are currently, concerned about an outcropping of legislation that is threatening end-to-end encryption, that is threatening communications privacy. Things like the spy clause in the UK's online safety bill, that in the name of protecting children is proposing an initiative that could allow, the UK government to mandate effectively spyware that would scan everyone's messages before they're sent, before they're encrypted, which ultimately nullifies encryption, introduces a significant vulnerability into these systems that, I don't think the people who are proposing this understand. And, to cap it off, doesn't actually, there's no evidence that that type of unprecedented mass surveillance would protect children. So I think, we're dealing with something very old, right? And this is the will to centralized power. And centralized power benefits from information asymmetries. They're a key tool of, social control and domination. And I don't think we're ever going to sort of, unless the structure of our world changes radically, that will persist. And so I don't think this is a fight that we sort of win with facts, or we finally convince people that actually, you're going to leave that power on the table. But I do think it's a fight we need to be prepared to continue waging, because again, a world without privacy is a world where, dissent, intimacy, the creation of new alternatives are foreclosed.
May I ask a follow-up question? Because I'm genuinely curious. There are many software designs for children and young people under 13, that is to say 12 years or younger, to be subject to a form of surveillance called parental controls. Basically, their parents or designated guardians can actually inspect the kind of communications, the software they download, the things they buy, the picture they send, and so on. But it's not for the state or for the company, but just to the guardians. How do you think about this sort of parental control? It's a limited form of surveillance.
Well, I think, parents caring for their children is wonderful. And I don't have an ideological problem with that. What I do have an ideological problem with is when, say, we mandate that all children are required to be surveilled by their parents. Because, of course, we know that for many children, harm comes from the family. For LGBTQ children, they can actually face, real harm within their family if certain things are disclosed. So I think, my view is children are people. They're not, small entities to be managed and controlled. And they do, have a right to privacy, particularly in contexts where they might be punished or hurt without it. But that is not to say that parental controls in some cases can't be beneficial and actually help guide children. I just think it's not something that we can have sort of a blanket mandate around. And we have to be very careful to recognize that, parents aren't always friends to their children, sadly.
Right. So it's like nothing about children without children. It needs to have meaningful input from children and not using children as an excuse, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Coming back to the topic of open source development, Audrey, has the Ministry of Digital Affairs encouraged the use of open source software internally? If so, what have been the associated benefits?
Yeah, definitely. As I mentioned, we take infrastructure level open source code already used by other governments. For example, matrix element already by the German and French governments, the GDS forms and notify already by, of course, the UK government, but also many in the Commonwealth and so on. And these are the bedrock components that has already been vetted for cybersecurity issues, penetration tested, and so on. And so just by adopting and translating them, we get to benefit from the latest and greatest innovations in accessibility, in privacy protection, and so on. And our contributions, our fixes, can also help everyone who are on the upstream to enjoy a safer bedrock components. And on top of that, we also strongly believe that our new code needs to be also provided as open source to other municipal governments and other ministries, because when we design a large system and we implement the cybersecurity and privacy privacy controls, and so on. All of this is a lot of investment. If it does not get reused a lot, then actually everyone has to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. And seldom does a municipal or city government has the kind of resource our ministry has when it comes to privacy engineering and cybersecurity. So just as a public good, we need to provide such systems. For example, in Taiwan, we just a few months ago gave everyone, all 23 million people in Taiwan, 6,000 NT dollars because there's TSMC and so on. It gave us a lot of extra tax last year, and so we share the wealth with people. But then the system to deliver this payment need to be made into a public code because municipal and ministry governments always needed to deliver some coupon or stimulus voucher or stipend and so on to people, and we need to ensure that people get to access them in an accessible way without suffering any privacy or cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So that is another area where we say public code is a kind of public infrastructure.
I see. Reusing public code creates a virtuous circle of accessibility and security. It's been a pleasure to dive into the fascinating open source movement, as well as how it can help us improve our privacy. And if you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and let us know what you think. See you next time on Innovative Minds.
Which is that my greatest hope right now for meaningful AI regulation that will actually, help people who could be harmed, who are at risk, is the Writers Guild of America and Screen Actors Guild strike that is happening in Hollywood. And for the people who may not be familiar, these are, kind of established and fairly powerful unions that represent the Writers Guild of America, represents writers who write TV and movies. Screen Actors Guild represents actors, celebrities. And they are on strike right now, demanding that they, as the workers, be able to decide whether AI is introduced into their creative process and how, if it's introduced, it's used. And this is incredibly important because, of course, the business model of these tech companies is to license these to the people who can pay for them, and the business models of the studios who are running kind of the corporate Hollywood is to cut costs as much as possible. And so we're looking at a context where AI, whether or not it can perform creative labor, and of course it can't, it's a probabilistic engine, is set to be used as a pretext to degrade the working conditions and the lives of these workers, in addition to producing art that is not created by humans about our shared world and reality, which is, creates a, much more impoverished landscape of artistic expression and a world that, I don't think is very nice to live in. So this is, hello, I'm Meredith Whittaker, president of Signal. See you on TaiwanPlus.
Hello, I'm Audrey Tang, Taiwan's digital minister. See you on TaiwanPlus.